Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Leanne Sanders. APTN News has obtained a copy of a confidential summary report into allegations of harassment and wrongdoing by Assembly of First Nations National Chief Roseanne Archibald. The report says the summary was delivered to the chiefs in Assembly on May 18, 2023. It's the result of a third-party investigation ordered in June 2022 after the AFN Executive Committee tried to suspend Archibald. Here's Daryl Stranger with more.
The investigation looked into 5 complaints by 5 different people, all who alleged the national chief engaged in, quote, workplace harassment and created a toxic or poisoned work environment. The report does not provide details of the allegations or findings for confidentiality purposes, other than to, quote, confirm the national chief's conduct amounted to harassment in 2 of the 5 reports. The investigation also found that Archibald breached the confidentiality of all 5 complainants, as well as reprisal. Quote, we conclude that by making statements that question the motives, intentions, and integrity of the staff members that have made complaints, and by making that suggestion in such a public venue, the respondent's conduct amounts to reprisal. Archibald made public statements about 4 staff in June and July of 2022, alleging they were trying to secure over $1 million in contract payouts in an attempt to stop Archibald from uncovering wrongdoing within the AFN. The findings of reprisal for the 5th complaint were unique, as several accusations by Archibald emerged in more public settings. The investigation found Archibald also breached an AFN resolution when she put out a press release on April the 21st saying she was, quote, vindicated by the contents, unquote, of the investigation. The national chief was not made available for an interview.
The Eamon Hamden law firm in Ottawa led the investigation. A spokesperson for Archibald said there was another, more detailed report that largely vindicated the national chief. When the Nunavut Legislative Assembly opened for the spring session, MLA Janet Brewster gave an emotional tribute to her son Jaco Lyle Ritchie, who died by suicide on March 13th. Here's part of her speech.
Mr. Speaker, like many of us, he made big mistakes that may have felt insurmountable in the moments and years as he grew into adulthood. And he sometimes very publicly owned up to those mistakes, focusing on what he cared about, uplifting targets of abuse, especially women. Though for a time, he so bravely admitted that he was part of the problem.
The Native Addictions Council of Manitoba's aging building will be getting a $21.6 million upgrade. It's still in the dreaming and planning stage, but the executive director of the Native Addictions Council of Manitoba says they're thinking big. The funding will come from Infrastructure Canada, and Teresa Crow, spreading his wings, says the modernizing of the building is the top priority.
We want to take some of the institutionalized look away from this. This used to be an old hospital, a nuns hospital that was donated to Native Addiction when it was known as Pritchard House back in 1984-85. Once we hire our architectural team, what we'll do is we'll start to focus on our priority spaces. So like the energy saving component, which is the key to this whole project.
MP Kevin Lamoureux says the infrastructure funding will see the building get energy efficient upgrades, including geothermal heating and cooling and solar panels.
Once it's completed, think about it in this sense. The building will see almost a 70%, 69.6% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and 70.8% in energy savings.
Other upgrades include making the rooms safer, installing new elevators to replace the relic that is still operating, and supporting the development of new programs. Elder Don Robinson says the facility helped him achieve sobriety in 1984, and it's made all the difference in his life.
I have met so many beautiful people in that time, and I've done so many things, started a family, and was able to achieve so many things, but only because I got to start here.
With a 50-year history of helping relatives in Manitoba, the Native Addictions Council of Manitoba is hoping the $21 million investment will help them continue their work for decades to come. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg. A recycling dump on Kanesatake Territory has reportedly been leaking toxins into the environment. So some residents demonstrated in front of the Crown Indigenous Relations Minister's office in Montreal to keep the pressure on. Lindsay Richardson reports.
A literal ping pong game outside of Mark Miller's office, staged to denounce a political one. A passing of responsibility on the issue of illegal toxic dumping in a Mohawk community 30 kilometers outside Montreal.
We remain skeptical as to whether or not this purported concern is a genuine commitment to understanding and addressing the issues we have faced as a community for over 3 decades now.
Blue is the assumed name of the group's appointed spokesperson. The others present have self-identified as Kanesatake members, but are not speaking out on the issue of the GNR dump over fear of reprisals.
We cannot sincerely trust those who have broken our trust since the beginning. Solutions can only be achieved through the creation of a safe and secure space where people can speak freely without violence of fear or intimidation.
At issue, the GNR recycling plant, which began operating in Kanesatake back in 2011 and was ordered by the province to cease operations back in 2020. The dump reportedly accepted too much toxic waste, contaminating nearby groundwater. The garbage dumped in the community doesn't necessarily come from the community. Former Grand Chief Serge Simon says only outside parties have the power to stop it.
It's really disheartening because at the time I fought like crazy. I think my biggest failure was not fighting hard enough. And, you know, the situation caught up to us so quickly. We had no idea what they were doing until it was too late.
Kanesatake's band council could not be reached before deadline. The neighboring community of Oka, however, asked the provincial government to intervene. Quebec's Indigenous Affairs, in turn, says they've kicked the GNR issue up to the feds and had a productive talk with Indigenous Services Canada. But at Tuesday's demonstration, this federal NDP member of parliament claims Canada has been aware for a while.
We wrote to Minister Guilbeault in March. He said, we are aware, but we cannot do anything. And they say, but it's Quebec government. And Quebec government is saying it's the federal government. And during that time, people are suffering there. And this is really environmental racism. And this is something that's called colonialism that still exists here.
Meanwhile,
there will be actions every week dramatizing the situation and showing the situation in Kanesatake to decision makers. There is also the trilateral meeting coming ahead, and we hope that concrete announcements for directly consulting the community will come out of it.
A trilateral meeting is planned between Canada, Quebec, and Kanesatake to discuss next steps, and this group hopes to stop passing the ball. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Montreal.
It's time for a short break, but stick around, there's more to come. An Indigenous healing center in Quebec hosted a gathering recently for people who work with incarcerated Indigenous men to share healing methods the center's been developing for over 30 years. Emilia Fournier has more.
Now, since I've been on this healing journey, the one of the 7 sacred teachings, the one I'm most in depth with right now at this stage of my healing is honesty. Start with myself.
At 68 years old, and after over 20 years in prison, Doc is finishing his sentence at Wesseskin Healing Lodge, where he's gotten in touch with his emotions and his Mi'kmaq culture.
You would never seen these tears before. Because the life I lived, it was a sign of weakness in the world I came from.
Wesseskin is a healing center and minimum security prison 100 kilometers north of Montreal for Indigenous men. It's the only center of its kind west of Manitoba and incorporates elder teachings, healing circles, art, and traditional ceremonies that you can't find in conventional prisons, like the bear ceremony.
Bear ceremony is we let out all the hurt and pain, anger, frustration, all the garbage that people carry. We let it out into the ceremony by screaming or crying or, you know, whatever you need to do.
Ralph White, a Mi'kmaq prisoner from Newfoundland, just got parole after 20 years in prison. He's now using Wesseskin as his halfway house and runs a healing circle for the other men.
You get to see what's inside, really dig deep and see what hurt and pain that you've gone through. Because you don't know you hurt yourself, but sometimes you hurt others around you, right? Because of that pain.
Wesseskin recently hosted a gathering earlier this month to share their methods and philosophy. Workers from Correctional Services Canada, or CSC, parole officers, and community workers came together to network and learn.
What other resources do we think that we can tap into besides our friendship centers, employment opportunities, housing? You mentioned housing over there and things like that because of our high homelessness population, right?
My expectations. I'd like to collaborate.
Carrie Thompson, a Métis and Cree CSC agent in Ontario, has worked a lot with Wesseskin in her career. She says more healing lodges need to get built, and CSC needs to give
the opportunity for parole officers, the rest of the case management team to be able to experience the healing lodge, whether it's Wesseskin or whether our other healing lodges, to understand the work that's really done here, right? So it's not always correctional programming, it's more culture-based.
There are often long wait times to get into the program. Doc worked with Wesseskin for 5 years before he could be transferred there. Indigenous prisoners have to be classified as minimum security to attend Wesseskin. But in 2018, the Supreme Court said that the tool used to determine security classifications was discriminatory towards Indigenous people.
There is a formula that is used for non-Native people. If you're Asian, Caucasian, or Black, you get that formula. But if you're Native, they don't use that same formula. We have our own formula, which is way different than that formula.
Charlie Commando has worked with prisoners for decades. He says that despite the high demand for healing centers, Wesseskin is rarely at capacity.
They basically don't send us a whole lot of people over there. It's up and down. It goes back and forth. They nickel and dime us. You know, they give us peanuts, but Correctional Services has everything to help them individuals, but they don't help them.
The center depends on CSC to send them clients, and its funding is based on the amount of people registered. Carrie Thompson says that CSC's resources for Indigenous inmates are improving, but there is still a lot of work to do.
You can't heal within a prison setting. Right? So it's one thing for the individuals to come down and meet with an elder or spiritual advisor, even in the Indigenous programming, kind of to drop those masks and have those interventions, but then they have to put that mask back on and go back to the range because they need to survive.
For men like Doc and Ralph, dropping that mask can change everything.
This place here with Wesseskin gave me more than I could ever ask for, more than I hoped for when I came here. Because it wasn't even just a sense of belonging, it gave me the sense of belief, you know, and the fact is, you know, the medicines are real, the medicines are strong.
Emilia Fournier, APTN National News, Saint-Alphonse-Rodriguez, Quebec.
If you happen to be in a New York restaurant and order lobster, it might be a Mi'kmaq who caught it under their right to earn a moderate livelihood. Angel Moore explains.
3 lifelong friends have established a trade route to bring Mi'kmaq caught lobster to American customers. Called 5 Tribe Seafoods, Derek Sock and Nolan Augustine of the Elsipogtog First Nation in New Brunswick formed the company so that harvesters can get a fair price for their catch.
You know, we fished for over 20 years, and then we've seen it, like, you know, the non-native fishermen will get a much better deal than us.
5 Tribe Seafoods is named after Wabanaki Confederacy, the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and Abenaki nations. It will transfer moderate livelihood lobster from the ocean to the table.
I think we have to cater to our brothers and sisters, you know, and we have to try to keep it in-house, I guess, so to speak, from the beginning to the end.
The company has already had one successful run. A couple of weeks ago, it transported 1 ton, about 1,500 lobsters, from Nova Scotia to Brooklyn, New York, with the help of friend Brian Stevenson of Philadelphia. He connected 5 Tribe Seafoods with American seafood distributor, the Brooklyn Lobster Company, so Mi'kmaq lobster are available in New York restaurants.
It seems history has dictated that they kind of isolated Mi'kmaq fishermen, not just from Canadian and U.S. markets, but international markets, and that's what we're striving for, to alleviate that.
5 Tribe Seafoods hopes to export up to 5,000 pounds of lobster a day to Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and New Jersey, and eventually the entire U.S. market.
Well, this operation is more like a mom and pop operation, and it's catering to like United States mom and pop, and they're bigger mama and papas over there.
5 Tribe Seafoods is projected to purchase moderate livelihood lobster from fishermen from all the Wabanaki nations. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Tubuktuk, also known as Halifax.
Little Bird is a new series that debuted this weekend on APTN and Crave. We'll take you to the red carpet premiere after the break. Alberta's provincial election is on May 29th. APTN's Chris Stewart spoke to NDP candidate Jody Calahoo Stonehouse. She's vying for the seat in Edmonton-Rutherford.
Jody Calahoo Stonehouse is Cree and Mohawk from the Michelle First Nation in Alberta. The former director of the Yellowhead Indigenous Education Foundation is also a radio host and film and television producer. Now the single mother is running for the NDP in the riding of Edmonton-Rutherford, the seat of the retiring Richard Feehan, who was the Alberta Indigenous Relations Minister and later the Indigenous Relations Critic when the UCP came to power in 2019. APTN caught up to her at her campaign office. She shares with another NDP candidate. We asked what are the most important issues to her.
The most important thing that we need to do for Albertans at this point is look at our health care. We have a mess. We need to make sure that people have access to doctors, to, doing blood work when they need blood work done, seeing physicians. There is so much work to do in health care. And then, of course, education is just as important to us. And, disaster response.
On the same night, NDP and UCP leaders Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith debated. Jody Calahoo Stonehouse debated her opponents as well.
There were about 150 folks who came out to sit and hear our positions on education, on healthcare, on balancing the budget. And so there was some really tough but critical questions that we need to be able to answer to our constituents. And it was wonderful to see all the folks show up.
Calahoo Stonehouse says she and the NDP will do things differently from the UCP.
The NDP will do many things differently. One is that all Albertans matter when we look at affordability, not just a few. We want to make sure that all single parents, mums and dads, citizens have, are able to pay their bills. Utilities are astronomically high for many people. We want to make sure that people can afford where they live, they can go to school, they have groceries in their fridge.
This day, Jody, her volunteers, and supporter actress Georgina Lightning are in the streets, asking for support and reminding them to vote and that early voting is available. Jody tells a story of meeting an 82-year-old who voted UCP all his life.
It's sad when people have believed in something their entire lives and it's changed on them. They cannot rely on the Conservative government to look after them. And so he said, for the first time ever in my life, I will vote NDP. I will vote for you, Jody. That's what the poll said.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Winnipeg's Glitterati was out in full force for the premiere of the 6-part series Little Bird, airing on Crave and APTN Lumi. The first episode of the series was showcased in Winnipeg this week. Little Bird Episode 1 opens with an idyllic prairie scene, an Indigenous family enjoying their morning on a reserve in 1968 Saskatchewan. It ends with the heart-wrenching scenes of a little girl being taken from her family. The series was co-created by Hannah Moskovich and Jennifer Podemski. Podemski explains the premise of the story.
This series is about a woman who was abducted from her family during the 60s scoop, and it's her returning home story, her reclamation of her identity story. It's her finding where she belongs story, while celebrating this very untold version of Indigenous love and Indigenous families, and celebrating home through an Indigenous lens.
The historical scenes are interspersed with more modern scenes from 1985, when the main character, Esther Rosenblum, first learned she came from an Indigenous family. Darla Contois plays Esther.
I mean, it's obviously a very sentimental, touching, personal story when it comes to the lives of Indigenous people. So for me, it feels like very powerful and very strong and very rooted in community to be able to finally share those stories with Canadians and with people all over the world. To be the star of a TV series as an Indigenous woman from a reserve, I never thought that was possible. So it just feels incredible to be like living your dreams. You know what I mean? Like, it's surreal.
Veteran actress and activist Michelle Thrush plays an important role in the series.
I feel like we are in a time of just absolute mass absorbing truth. And this is a part of it. It's a really important time for Indigenous people because so much is coming up right now. And as an artist, I always say that we bring light to the darkness. That's our jobs as artists. And I feel like this is something, not to say that the scoop was ever in the dark, but with Canada in general, we are bringing light to a very important subject.
Episode 1 streams Friday, May 26th on Crave and APTN Lumi in English and French. The other 5 episodes drop every Friday after that. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Leanne Sanders. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.